Alright, welcome to my YouTube channel, Math on the Fritz. What we're going to do is recap our ability to graph lines and to look at a graph and find out what line made it happen. And the reason we're doing this is because we need to look at inequalities with two variables, and we want to remember how to do it when it's in equality first. So here we have an equation of a line. It has two variables in it, an independent and a dependent. So we're going to be looking and saying, how do I make a graph of this information? So there's really two numbers you have to pay attention to. There's a slope, which appears in front of the x, and then a y-intercept, which is at the end of the equation. And the y-intercept is really the one that we're going to graph first. So if I use my drawing tool here, and I select a nice color, and I highlight just that -4 at the end, we're going to start our graph by using that number. And the reason that I like using that particular number, the -4, is because that's the value that I get when I make x equal to 0. So if I didn't have an x term at all, if I said this was 0, it would get rid of this whole part and I'd just have y equals -4. So that's why I'm starting my graph right here. Now that I have that point, I need a second point. The second point's going to come from that fraction which is in front of the x. So here my fraction is 1/2. We're going to consider that a rise for the number that's on top. That tells me if I'm going up or down, and by how much. So this one has a rise of 1. Notice it's positive, so I'm going up 1 from that point. Now I can't do anything in my graph yet because I haven't considered the number on the bottom. The number on the bottom is the run. So not only am I going to go up 1, I also have to go left or right. So if I look at the number down there, it's a 2. That was also positive, so I'm going to go to the right 2. So I went up 1 from the top number, right 2 from the bottom number, and there's that second point that I was looking for. Now you'd think 2 points really isn't much of a line. You could just continue to go up 1 and over 2 so that you can have a better feel for what the line actually looks like. Up 1 and over 2. And then you may remember, if you think of driving on a road, if you go from Gardner to Augusta, that would be like going this way. Well, the same road will bring you from Augusta back to Gardner. So we didn't have to go up and to the right. That same road is also going down and to the left. So I'm just going to put those points in for completeness so that I can really see my entire line. So now I took an equation which was purely algebraic, and I made a graph that helped us see what it was. Now I could then draw in a straight line, best of my ability, and there we go. I've now drawn a line that fully represents that information. Now if I put a negative in front of this fraction, the only thing it's going to change is instead of going up 8, now I'm going to go down 8. So if I flip back over to blue, let's do a second example. If x were 0, then this whole fraction would be gone, and I would just have y equals +3. So I get to start my graph at +3 on the y-axis. And there we are. Now I can address that second number, that fraction. Again, it's rise over run, just as you see right over here. Same thing, rise over run, but it's a -8. So I'm going to go down 8 from that point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I'm going to go to the right 3. And there's my second point. Now your line's only made up of 2 points on this one. I can't fit a third point in. So there's my line. Yay! Fully graphed. Now you're going to notice this one is rising to the right. It's a positive slope, so it's rising to the right. This is a negative slope, so it's falling to the right. So a good quick check visually is just to look, is it rising or is it falling? And just like you read a book, you always read from left to right when you're reading a book. So now when I come over here, I'm reading left to right. it's falling. So that's why I had a negative slope here. So that's going to show you what you're going to do for all of those examples. Now we know how to graph if I give you the equation. What if the equation only had one variable in it, like this, x equals 3? That was one of those weird exception ones. So if I look at x equals 3, well, here's the x-axis, and here's 3. What I'm telling you is that no matter what the y value is, x is always 3. So if y was 5, the x still has to be 3. If y was negative 2, well, x still has to be 3. So when there's only one variable in your problem, it means that you have either a horizontal or a vertical line. In this case, I have a vertical line. Now, you'll notice this one doesn't have a fraction on it. So I still have to graph it somehow. So what I'm going to do is say divided by 1. And now I'd have the ability to graph that if I wanted to. I'm going to start at negative 5 on the y-axis, because if x were 0, then this whole part would cancel out and I'd just have y equals negative 5. And notice I can't go down 4 on this graph. Going down 4 takes me off the graph. So what I'm going to do is instead, I'm going to take that little negative that I have there, and I'm going to flip it down into the bottom. So I'm going to make this a positive 4 so I can go up, but a negative 1 so I can go left. 1, 2, 3, 4, up 4, left 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, up 4, left 1. And now I have my nice graph. Oh, that was a rough line. Sorry about that, folks. So there it is. I was able to make my line. If I erase the little thing that I just made so that you can see it a little more clearly, still working on my eraser tool. So, aha. See how that was a negative slope to start and my line is falling to the right? So that's good. That means that I got that one right. If you would have accidentally gone up 4 and right 1, you would have seen that your line was rising to the right, and you would have known, oh, I made a mistake, went the wrong direction, and then you would know to go left instead of going right. The second part of the assignment that you're going to see is the one where I give you the graph, and I ask you to then write an equation. So now we're going to work a little bit backwards. It's not going to be a long process. These ones go pretty quick. It's just a matter of knowing where you're going to start. So if I make my little text box here, I know that all of my equations here are going to start with y equals. I'm going to have some number in front of x, and then I'm going to have a number at the end. The number at the end is actually the easiest one to see here. So when I go up and I look at the y-axis, I can see the lines crossing at positive 4. So I'm just going to put that in at the end. And then I'm going to go back and try to find another point that looks like it's clean in my graph. So I had this one, which was at 4. The next clean point I see is right here on the x-axis. It crosses at 1. And if I look at that slope, I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4 down. So I've got to have a negative 4 for my rise. And then I'm going right 1. So if I'm typing my answer into this, I have to have a negative 4 on top of my fraction. And technically I have a 1 on the bottom, but we don't have to show division by 1, because in math we don't like to write things unless they have an effect. So dividing by 1 doesn't have an effect. So you could either put negative 4 divided by 1 as your slope fraction, or you could just call this one negative 4 as your slope. If I go over to this one now, it's a little bit harder to see, but if I put the dot there, the dot is right in the center of the graph. Call that the origin. So I'm starting at a value of 0. Now I need a second point. I don't get that second point until way up here. So I've got my 2 points. Now I can try to make my equation. Again, I'm just starting y equals. I'm going to put a space in front of the x because I know there's got to be a slope fraction there. And I'm going to look for where it crosses the y-axis. It crosses right at 0. So just to help you see what's going on, I'm going to put that plus 0 in. We're going up 5, right 1. So I'm going to put a 5 over 1 in there. And then I'm going to simplify this up so it looks nicer. Dividing by 1 doesn't change anything, so I'll get rid of that. Adding 0 doesn't change anything either. If I add $0 to my bank account, didn't change. So I'm just going to get rid of that. And there you are. Y equals 5x is the full equation of that line. Now there's really not a lot of funky things you can see here. Maybe something like 14. 14, the only reason that I say that's a little bit different from what we did before is the second point isn't very clear. So you can see that it's hitting -2 on the y-axis, but it never hits the x-axis in this picture. So you can't just look at where it hits the x-axis. You have to find a point where it looks really clear to you. So if I go right here, it looks like it's perfectly at that little hash mark. It's perfectly here, and it's perfectly here. So those are the 2 points I'm going to use in order to make my equation. So this is the last one it looks like we're going to have to do. I'll make my text box. I know that I have to have y equals, because that's how these always start. And then I know that I'm going to have a number in front of x and a number behind x. The number behind x is where I'm starting on the y-axis. There it is. And then I need to get that slope fraction in front of the x. I'm dropping down 1, and I'm moving right 3. So I'm going to do -1 divided by 3. Again, that's just rise and run. I put a negative on because I'm falling. And then I went over 3. That's why I'm dividing by 3. And voila, our graph is complete. So I hope this tutorial is helpful for you as you work through your work. Those are the only 2 concepts that we're practicing this week. And I hope you have a wonderful vacation. Look forward to seeing you live in class.